Good morning and happy Saturday. Welcome to Inside Texas Football, powered by InsideTexas.com. I'm with Eric Nalin, managing editor of InsideTexas.com. We're going to talk a little bit about the coaching search, which was the big news this week. Obviously, going to have a little bit of team news, but primarily here we want to answer your questions. Thanks so much for being here, Roaster. Eric, let's just go ahead and get into the running back coach situation. We've talked a lot this week, certainly on the shows we've had on YouTube, but also at InsideTexas.com about kind of the makeup of a running back coach, what we're really looking for there. We talk a lot about, volume recruiter, generally a high energy guy. You mentioned also that this is considered to be a young man's job.
Yeah.
How would you profile the type of coach that Texas is looking for?
Well, I think they would like to recapture Tashard Choice if they could, and that's why I think Keenan Hall at Baylor makes sense in that regard. We've kind of heard him call Tashard Choice 2.0. Younger guy, very good recruiter. It doesn't necessarily show up because he's at Baylor. If he was at another school, it would be a lot easier to recruit. But he built good relationships. He comes with a lot of praise from some of the players we know, some of the recruits we know. But lately I'm starting to rethink this a little bit because I'm looking at the makeup of the Texas room, and they might need somebody that's a proven teacher as much as anything, because they got a lot of question marks at the position, and they're very young. C.J. Baxter's coming off an injury and just missed a year that would have really propelled him into a very strong junior year. Now he's a sophomore because of the injury. Trey Wisner, they're still trying to build him up. I'm not sure that he's an every down back in the SEC, despite his heroic effort this past year. Yeah. You can't really expect him to do that again. Then they've got Jarrett Gibson, who clearly was far from a finished product, which is why he didn't play more this season. Got all the talent in the world, very promising future, but still needs to be coached up. And then you got two freshmen, James Simon and Ricky Williams, or Ricky. I'm sorry,
man, that'd be nice. Let's just do that again.
Ricky Stewart, yeah. Maybe we don't need a great coach.
You probably don't need a great coach.
And so, there's going to be a lot of development there. But ideally, you would find somebody that recruits, maybe unlocks a region that you're not super familiar with, that was the beauty of Tashard Choice. He came in knowing the whole Southeast. He had a proven record of winning a big recruitment with Jahmyr Gibbs, which, I think everybody was sleeping on Jahmyr Gibbs. That kid was sensational until the very end. That's when everybody got on him, was late. But Tashard does a really good job of identifying who he wants early and would put his hooks in. And it was almost over with the second he identified who that guy was. So ideally, they could find another Tashard. I'm not sure how likely that is, but this guy's going to have to be able to coach up a position that's lacking experience.
When I've heard interviews with the running backs, and I'm thinking, primarily of just obviously the recent running back class. Choice was noted as being obviously a high energy coach, but they really loved his coaching style, coaching toughness. And obviously, prior to that, we had Stan Drayton, who was less of a volume recruiter, maybe. Okay. I think it's safe to say, but probably more in that teaching mold. I'm wondering, this is something that's been just in terms of a theory, specifically with the running back room, is NIL. And does NIL maybe lessen the need for the volume recruiter because of that other element that's thrown in there? Or do you still think that's just got to be in the makeup?
I mean, it does make it less important, but that doesn't mean it's unimportant. Relationships are very important in recruiting still, no matter what. And if nothing else, you want the tiebreaker. The tiebreaker is not going to be $30,000 probably for some of these high level guys. The tiebreaker is going to be the relationship, what the school has to offer. All that stuff still matters. It's definitely muted a little bit. But yeah, Tashard Choice had a lot of energy. That he brought something to the coaching staff that it didn't necessarily have. Personality-wise, he and Stan Drayton couldn't be more different.
Right. Well, there's an age gap there too, right? I mean,
age gap
obviously skews much younger.
Stan a little more stoic. Tashard much more energetic. So he brought something that was very important to the coaching staff. And we even mentioned it the day we broke that he left. I think I mentioned something. Maybe it was the day before. The hire of Mark Orphy was important because he brought sort of a Tashard Choice energy he would bring that to the defense, and it does come with youth. I mean, this podcast or this video cast would be a lot different if we were holding it 10 years ago.
It's fair.
Probably have a girl walking back and forth there.
Yeah, you know, good on you. Really good for you. I would be easily 90 pounds heavier. That's a slight exaggeration. But
we going in a positive trend line.
Well, I don't know. It's just the atrophy of age, right?
Yeah.
The thing we talked about too, and this was before the show, you and I were briefly discussing this, but the idea that the progression from running back coach is a little bit tough, to be honest with you, because this morning what I did just to go through it is I went through all the head coaches of the SEC and went through their profiles to see if any of them had ever coached in the running back room, and only two of them had, and that was Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, who coached at Arkansas State in 2012, and then Jeff Lebby was at Mississippi State in 2012 to 2016. Most of the head coaches that progress are what you would imagine, obviously quarterback, a heavy leaning in coaching wide receiver, and some coaching on the offensive line. So it also, to me, that profiles to a type of coach that really you have to make your hay in the recruiting realm, or else you kind of lose that edge to maintain your job, because it doesn't seem to be a job with a lot of upward mobility, for lack of a better expression.
Well, it's not uncommon to see a guy like Lebby or Drinkwitz have a stop at running back. Obviously, they would never be lifers. So sometimes you're just looking to get a guy on the staff that you really like, and that's a position you can make room for. I'm trying to think of some other guys. Jeff Traylor it's tight ends is another coach where you'll see.
Yeah, tight end, right? Yep.
You'll see that position where they just want to get a guy on staff. He has some other value add outside of running back and recruiting generally, that they're just trying to get him on staff. So that's not surprising, but it's very rare that you see a guy that was like a pure running backs coach take a head coaching job and have success. Frank Wilson struggled to do it at UTSA. Larry Porter was he at Memphis or New Mexico State? I think maybe both. I don't know. He was not good at it. There's just not enough on their plate to have a proven track record. I don't think running back coach prepares you to be a head coach. You're managing the smallest room. You're not necessarily teaching cohesion like you are on the offensive line. Or wide receiver coach, you're teaching with the passing game, and the quarterbacks are involved. Reading coverages are involved. Dabo Swinney was a wide receivers coach before he got elevated to head coach. It doesn't provide the workload. It's a different type of job. You're there to be the energy guy. You're there to be a recruiter, a volume recruiter, not just recruiting a position. That was Stan Drayton's knock, because he only recruited running backs, and he only recruited like 3 guys a year. Now, it's great when you get Bijan. But there's also a reason they had to move Rashawn from quarterback to running back, because the room was lacking bodies and talent.
Yeah,
he did a great job identifying Jonathan Brooks. That's definitely a good win. But Tashard Choice brought a lot more value to the program. His energy, recruiting in the Southeast, not just his position, but forwarding names of other guys. That's a very important part of it. You have to start the evaluation process as early as possible to weed out the guys you do and don't want. You have to know who to target. And a lot of times they'll target a 3-star early on that nobody's really watching because Tashard Choice forwarded a name from hitting some of those powerhouse schools in the Southeast. So, yeah, there's just anytime I would just sight unseen not hire a running backs coach to be head coach. And, sorry for any running back coach out there. You got to go prove yourself. Go become offensive coordinator, or switch positions, but it's just not likely to happen.
I think. And I want to highlight this because sometimes it gets a little bit confused. When we say volume recruiter, we don't necessarily mean your position group. Obviously, a volume recruiter, like if you think of offensive line, right? There's clearly a lot of offensive linemen. Go ahead.
A volume recruiter, you could send him to recruit any position. He's going to relate to any type of recruit, a corn-fed offensive lineman from Iowa or a Dallas South Oak Cliff cornerback. He's going to have that personality. Jeff Banks is a volume recruiter. It doesn't necessarily show up with tight ends, but he does a magnificent job. The fact that they put him in South Dallas tells you all you need to know about his ability to relate. What I'm really high about Mark Orfe is, he went to North Shore High School, went to TSU, coached at Montana State. That relatability lends itself to becoming a volume recruiter. But again, it's personality, it's energy, enthusiasm. But a lot of it is just the ability to relate to people from all walks of life.
When we're talking about this type of search, and this just may be from my perspective, but in the years that I've been following Texas, this seems to be at least from my perspective, pretty unique in the sense that, Texas is really on a high right now. Sark is getting the recognition for doing a great job as a team manager, as a coach, as a staff manager. And we've got a lot of people reaching out to him. That's got to make his job a little bit easier. Whereas I felt like certainly during the Charlie Strong era, when we're flying to Tulsa to try to beg an offensive coordinator to come to our program, it seems to me that this is the position you want to be in if you lose a running backs coach.
Yeah, I don't even know how many people he's called. I know how many people have reached out to me and Justin Wells just asking what we're hearing about it. And they've done a pretty good job keeping a lid on it. But there's a lot of agents maneuvering, trying to get their guy in front of them, at least on the list, much less an interview. We're hearing about, the guys that are pretty well known. We don't want to put their business out there because they got to maintain relationships at their current school, because most of them are not going to get that call. But the last time it was open, I forwarded the name of one of the best known running backs coaches in the country. And I forwarded it up to the staff. They had already identified Tashard, and it was a great hire, no doubt. But I don't even think they've reached out to this guy. And like I said, he's one of the best known guys in the country. Now, you always have to wonder, are they trying to leverage their current employer for more money, or you don't know what their motives are necessarily, but there's definitely a lot of interest. We've rekindled some old relationships and made some new relationships just off people having so much interest in this job, and we're just lowly riders.
If you had to, and you've done a really good job of this up to this point of kind of profiling, as we talked about, the things that are important. Obviously, we want a teacher. We want someone that is a volume recruiter. If you had to say one region, what region would you want that running backs coach to have a really great hold on?
Well, either Texas or the Southeast for that position. A DB coach, I think it would have been good to have somebody with West Coast ties, just because there's a lot of DBs coming out of the West Coast. Texas has offered a lot, but Orfe's going to be fine. He's got Houston ties. You can never have enough Texas ties recruiting Texas. Now, they are going to be recruiting a lot more globally, just because Texas doesn't always have enough of what they need to be a perennial contender for the national championship. There's always going to be holes in a cycle, or not enough depth, even in a state like Texas. But for running backs, coach, man, they hit a home run with Tashard. Now, they just hired Georgia Tech's scouting director.
Yep.
Was it Aaron Jones, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron Jones, 2 R's in his name.
Right.
And so that's going to help them keep the pulse of what's going on in Georgia. Georgia's a very, very important state recruiting wise. That shows up in their actions, how they view Georgia. So that's going to help have an understanding of the relationships and dynamics and the players in the Southeast. So, but hopefully the guy ideally unlocks the region, or at least protects the region.
We want to get to your questions. Thank you so much for being here. If you are in the chat, if you're with us today, please go ahead and throw any questions you might have us for this week. This is an opportunity for us to kind of wrap up the week. And if anything you've seen or want to talk about, go ahead and hit us with that. But before we do, I think it would be appropriate if we hear from our sponsor for today, Mr. David McClellan.
I'm just going to say, guys, you probably need a fiduciary financial advisor. And I've got the guy for you. His name is David McClellan with Forum Financial. He works broadly and deeply with his clients as a financial life coach. And he should know something about coaching because he won several national championships as a swimmer for the University of Texas. He specializes in financial planning and has contributed numerous articles to Kiplinger on the topic of retirement tax bombs. So contact David today to be your fiduciary financial planner and schedule a 1-hour consultation to assess your financial situations. The free consultation is available, so just give him a call. The number is 312-933-8823. That's 312-933-8823. His email is also in the description below.
Your title for your article yesterday, I think, is really appropriate, Eric. It's success breeds attention, and lots of it. This is the mark of a really healthy program. I know Paul Wadlington has talked about this a lot. When you have a deep room, whether it's a wide receiver room, whether it's a defensive back room, and players need to go to other places to play because you've got so much depth. Mm-hmm. Well, that's also starting to happen in the coaches area as well. And unfortunately, choice may not be the only coach that ascends, for lack of a better expression, to the NFL. What what should we be worried about? What should we be thinking about? Obviously, for all the reasons you described earlier, we don't want to go into names right now just because, you know what, they may stay. That would create a really awkward situation. But what is this doing to the program? What have you heard?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's February 15th and we're still talking coaching changes. That's the calendar just goes longer and longer and longer, it seems, every year. But yeah, there's two coaches that are receiving NFL interest, and that's it's kind of all the rage right now. Is guys, the lines between college and the pros, coaching wise, have never been as close or blurred as they are right now. You're seeing a lot of guys go one way. Surprisingly, a number of college guys have gone to the NFL. That doesn't normally happen. And then you're seeing some NFL guys come down to college as well. That could be the case again. And Texas might hire a running backs coach with NFL experience for all I know. So that's the lines are blurred. Yeah, it would be. It's these coaches are the same coaches they were 2 years ago. I was trying to tell everybody that this is where Texas is headed. It had a good staff, but now the proof is in the pudding. They've shown it yet again, even though they've shown it at previous stops. And the NFL circling still. Tishard might not be the last coach to go to the NFL. I would be surprised if any of the guys I've heard about took a collegiate job.
I think the thing that certainly that I've heard when I see interviews, and I know some friends maybe in some different sports that coached at a collegiate level and then went to the pros. They always tell me, like, when they're in the pros, the thing they love about it is it's just nothing but ball. That's all they do. They talk about that. And now that the collegiate schedule is we're going into 16 games, right? We're getting to an NFL level of games right now. So you're doing all of that at the collegiate level, and then you're on the road recruiting. I can see how an NFL type schedule, even though those hours are long, may be more appealing just because you completely eliminate that recruiting element.
Yeah, I mean, college has been professionalized, but without the benefits of professional sports from the coaching standpoint. Coaches don't have to worry about the draft necessarily. They're curious about it. They want to know who they're going to coach, who they're going to get, whether or not their position is going to get upgraded. But they're not on the road pounding the pavement. They're not talking to parents now. They're not talking to agents now. It's a nonstop job. I don't care what the hours are in the NFL. They're nowhere close to what they are in college because right now coaches are on vacation, and then they'll be on vacation again in early July. And it's other than that, it's just 50-hour work weeks in the off season at least, and 80, 90-hour work weeks in the season at least. So it's it never really stops. So hopefully they're enjoying that short vacation they're getting right now. I know some of them are out of town. But yeah, like I said, it's professionalized, but without the positives of the professional sport.
And we're moving toward, we've got the House legislation, or the House rather, court
Settlement.
case the settlement, thank you, that's coming in, which won't necessarily affect any of the scheduling or any of the elements that are difficult for coaches that we just talked about, but it is going to add that extra layer of payment, right? That the administration may have to do it, whether you're a GM of the program or not. So again, the professionalism of it is, I mean, we are borderline on the same level in some areas. I'm curious, sticking with the idea of schedule, we discussed this earlier. The SEC may be moving to a 9-game schedule, which is certainly not going to happen this year. Obviously, that schedule is set. But moving to a 9-game schedule and promoting better out-of-conference games, because one of the beauties of the SEC for a very long time was that borderline bye week that they would have sometime in October, maybe even late September, with a Polytechnical Institute that played Division I AA, that they would schedule late in their season, generally before their rivalry game, which I always thought was brilliant. That may be going by. I'd be curious to see whether that goes by the wayside, whether they like what Texas has done, front load a really heavy opponent in the first 2 games, which I think is really smart by Texas, because you're not necessarily at midseason strength, but neither is your opponent. So you can kind of catch each other at that time, and you have a whole off season to plan for it. But with that 9-game schedule, have you heard anything about whether they're going to use the pods or the mini divisions?
Well, I anticipate they're going to a 9-game schedule in 2026. That's based on everything I've heard. It hasn't been held to a vote yet. Otherwise, I would have broken that by now. But that'll go to a vote whenever the commissioner calls it, and I think he'll have the votes to get the 9-game schedule. It just makes the most financial sense for all involved. It improves the sport. Like you said, the SEC got by with that 4-game of free wins, even for all the bad teams. They were getting 4 free wins a year, pretty much. And then they were living by that. They were bragging on that. It's ridiculous. I do think it's going to go to pods, and I would not be surprised if Texas was in with A&M, OU, and Arkansas. I don't know that for sure, though. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out. I haven't heard anything definitive on that in quite a while. But when it was discussed, the most realistically with me, that's what I heard was pods and basically having a full rivalry pod.
Yeah, which to me sounds awesome. I mean, you've got Arkansas, A&M, Oklahoma, Texas, all in one pod.
You're gonna play OU and A&M anyway.
Right, exactly.
No matter what, and then you might as well throw Arkansas in there too. So that's what makes the most sense to me.
Our friend David Keith Williams has a question here specifically about Coach Jackson. I'm going to paraphrase this if that's all right, David. Coach Jackson was acknowledged as Recruiter of the Year for the 2025 recruiting cycle, but I don't hear about his recruiting talents like Coach Choice, Coach Banks, Flood, and Sarkisian. Is Coach Jackson not getting enough praise for his work, Eric?
Well, I mean, this is just proof that he left Inside Texas. David Keith Williams stayed on Inside Texas. We talk about Jackson all the time. We were greatest defenders when he got to Texas late in the 2024 cycle, 23. How they're all running together. He got a late start, and everybody's like, "Well, why is he not getting Micah Hudson?" And look how that played out. He's a good recruiter, very no-nonsense guy. He likes guys that are like Ryan Wingo and Jamie French. I don't know Kalik Lockett as well as I know those 2 guys, but I imagine he's in the same mold of team first sort of wide receivers, which you don't see. It's kind of like how they hit that run of awesome running backs personality-wise with Bijan, Roschon, and Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah,
they're looking to do that at wide receiver, a position that's not really known for that. I don't want to pour salt in the wounds, but I don't think Coach Jackson ever would have had Jonte Cook at the top of his board. So he's finding really good guys first and foremost, and then guys that are willing to block. If you're not going to block, you're not going to play for him. That's why Isaiah Bond sat his ass on the bench for the last few games. And so he's looking for really good guys. And when you do that, you narrow the list down pretty good, to meet his standards. And then they pretty much tend to commit for the right reasons. Jamie French, of course, NIL played a part. But he could have had that and stayed at home too. But he built that relationship with Jamie French and was able to overcome that momentum that Florida created late. Did a great job with Kalik Lockett, and then he didn't overplay his hand. I love the Dalen McCutcheon take too. That to me is one of my favorite takes of the entire cycle. I think that kid was a stud. The second Decorian Moore became a no-go. That's who I wanted. But he also knows how to play it smart. He didn't try to overplay his hand and go back in on Decorian Moore. Because that would upset the apple cart. So Recruiter of the Year with only 3 guys in the class, I don't know. That might be questionable, but he did put together a fantastic class, and he did a great job throughout the cycle.
I think one thing that gets missed sometimes if you're not an InsideTexas.com reader is what Sark is doing with the locker room, how he manages that locker room. And everything that you're talking about, Eric, bleeds into that. And that's the personality aspect of it, right? They have a very high mental eval that they do with pretty much everybody that comes in. It's obvious there's going to be misses sometimes, certainly, but I think that is one of the keys to what Sarkisian has been able to bring into this program. And that trickles down. You talk about a Coach Choice, you talk about a Coach Flood, a Coach Banks that are bringing in guys with that mental eval. And I think that is something that is really, really important. That gets, again, talked about a lot on the board, but maybe not mentioned in public as much as one of the strengths of Sarkisian. He's really great at that mental eval. If you had to, is it because of his past, do you think? Because of the way that he had to kind of hit a low and then bring himself back up, that he's able to relate to these kids and maybe demonstrate to them the mental aspect of being at this high level? What would you attribute that to?
I think he wants a professional culture. He wants to, and you need maturity to have that. That's where I think it stems from.
Yeah.
You just, maturity to have a common goal, to put everything else behind you, focus on football. Obviously academics are important too, but Yeah, it's that professional culture I think drives, is this guy going to fit into my culture? And sometimes you're right. They do have a miss. They have a miss when they bet on a really good talent. It's at least they're not missing on guys that are average talents and still a poor mental eval. There's going to be times that they know that there's a little risk with the player, but it's worth the risk. And they're not going to bring in a guy that's just a bad person. But sometimes you'll have to take a diva or whatever just because they're so talented. But I think it's that professional culture drives the importance of the mental eval.
We're going to go to Manny being Manny here, and this is something that I know that we've been pushing. Joining us at InsideTexas.com primarily because you're going to get really in-depth answers to some of these questions. It's $1 American for a week. You're going to get a lot of data on this stuff. And one of the things that Eric has been doing over the past few weeks is auditing the rooms, getting a sense of what talent we have, who is coming up, as it were, on the depth chart. So I don't think it's appropriate at this point to go through that entire list, Eric, because you have been incredibly thorough in that. But if you could maybe think of off the top of the head, 1 or 2 players that you're expecting a big spring from, not necessarily that you want a big spring from, but they're due, they're ready, they've done the work, they're going to have a big spring.
I mean, these questions are tough in that, we could talk about guys that nobody's really talking about just because they've been incubating and, putting their head down, or we could talk about obvious guys like Arch Manning and Ryan Wingo.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
I think Arch and Ryan Wingo are going to have massive springs, and they have to. Those two probably set the ceiling for the offense next year. They're going to be retooling the offensive line. There's going to be lots of storylines on the offensive line to follow. But Goosby's another one that's obvious to me is going to have a big spring. Those are 3 on offense. Running back, they're not going to really see anything because CJ Baxter won't be back yet. So that one's, I think we're more known. Hopefully we hear about Jarrett Gibson having a good spring as far as doing the smaller things more consistently well. Offensive line, it's a big spring. I don't know who we're going to have a big spring from. We're going to have a ton of competition on the offensive line. Tight end, I think Jordan Washington, have been high on him since the second they signed him. I think he's got the ability to be a 50-catch receiver out of the box next year. Now the question is going to be, how does he block those talented edges in practice? We should get a good idea of that. Defensively, let's see here. Edge, Colin, everybody knows Colin. Zena Umeozulu is one that everybody needs to watch. Now, I don't know when he's going to break out and become a player, but it's going to happen at some point. Just too athletic, too natural of a pass rusher, putting on good weight. I could see him having a big spring and everybody starting to talk about him. Leon Lafau, he's going to play better than he played this past year. And he played well. He's just going to get better. He got a little too over-aggressive playing the run. I think he's going to have a good spring. He's going to have that period where things are going to slow down for him. He can process what he did right, what he did wrong. I think we're going to see a lot of growth after him, after he got some experience. Let me see. Hopefully we hear about Kobe Black. But I do think Kobe Black is going to have some competition with Jalen Gilbo at corner. Because like I've been writing about, the long-term goal is to get Taft, Derek Williams, and Jelani McDonald on the field at the same time. And the best way to do that is to put McDonald at star. Now, Derek Williams won't be back for the spring, but I can still see them tinkering with McDonald at star just so they can get more depth going at safety. There's a million storylines. There's going to be a lot of breakout candidates. There's going to be a lot of competition with so many guys, 14 guys going to the NFL Combine. What does that tell you? There are jobs open.
Yeah. One of my favorite rooms to watch, especially in this offseason, is that linebacker room. You're going to have probably the most high-profile defensive player in the country in Ant Hill, and maybe second is going to be Colin Simmons. So 2 on the same team. But how they decide to use Hill in conjunction with Lafau, with Ty Anthony, I think is going to be really fun to watch, because you do have the thing about Lafau that was so fun. It was, see ball, hit ball. I mean, it was just very much, the kid was just a downhill bludgeon. Mm-hmm. And you obviously love that in a linebacker position, but the thing that really separates the Ant Hills or the Jadays, it's what's happening between the ears. They're processing at an incredibly quick pace. Their football IQ is off the charts, and they're able to execute at a very, very high level. And I'm hoping to see some of these younger players that may not necessarily have the physical attributes or talent that maybe an Ant Hill does, but certainly up there, start to gain that mental side of the game. And I think that's a room for me that I expect to see a big jump just across the board in terms of the floor raising a little bit of the quality of play there.
Yeah, the two deep is similar. Each player, each starter is similar to the person right behind them, and they have similar questions. You got Brad Spence behind Anthony Hill. Both of them, their question is playing in reverse, get how deep they can get into coverage. Anthony Hill, we know, is working with DB coaches and trainers to get a better feel for pass coverage. That's going to be the number one thing that he hears about from NFL scouts. And then the other play, it's Ty Anthony and Leonga. They're still developing physically, so they have that in common. And just still getting experience, but they're both very comfortable getting deep in drops. And now it's about playing more consistently downhill. Now they definitely both want to come downhill and hit, but there's still that processing of coming on. What's the offensive lineman trying to do? When you can diagnose and anticipate the play, you know how to take on the block better. Playing fast and processing, that's a huge part of it. They have that question, but they both have the ability. Those are all around. Those two are probably two most natural linebackers in the room. And you're saying that in a room that has Anthony Hill.
It would, yeah, and to me that's saying quite a bit. I don't know if how your algorithm is working, Eric, but mine, I'm just getting a ton of Luke Coakley stuff in my Twitter feed. Just all these things about what a genius that guy was and how absolutely brutal he was. And I think when we think linebacker, we think of the Singletaries, we think of the Butkus, we think of the the Malik's a good example, right? These are highly physical specimens, but we neglect sometimes to really consider the mental aspect of it and what is required. And Ian did a really good job this last preseason of writing and highlighting the maturation that was going to be needed from Ant Hill moving to that middle linebacker position. So it's still in development, and I love the fact that he's moving and getting a lot of coaching rather from the secondary people. We've got one question here from Kenneth. I think the fans will be left in the dark on the progress of players without a spring game. Thoughts? Well, if I may, one real quick here. Just guys, it's $1. It's $1 a week. You will not be left in the dark on any of these players if you just read at InsideTexas.com. I mean, the amount of information that these guys are printing out is insane. So, but let's go ahead and take that. Let's talk spring game just for a little bit here, Eric. A couple weeks ago, when we heard that Matt Rule was talking about maybe getting rid of the spring game, maybe having a private practice for people that were members of a collective, or all these different variations of a supplement, or rather a substitute to the spring game, the idea being that that was not something Texas was interested in. Texas is very good. CDC has been very upfront about fan service. He's been very good about, the Longhorn city limits, obviously Bevo Boulevard, all of these things that are fan-centric. But things seem to have shifted over the last few weeks, and it seems now that the spring game may not be happening, or there's a version of it that may not be the same as it was. What are you hearing, and what are your thoughts on this idea that the fans won't know what the players' progress is like?
Well, I love that there's no spring game, because we learn a lot more about the team during our spring practice reports than we do the actual game. The game is rigged and managed by Sark. He picks the teams and he picks the scenarios, and we're not getting that zero-sum understanding of good going on good like we get in practice. So normally there are no surprises in the spring game, unless it's just, last year was a lot more explosive than we've ever seen before. Sark made it more fun. Well, practices weren't like that. It's not like they were scoring touchdowns every other play in practice.
Right.
So the spring practice reports are going to give you an understanding of where the team is at. And we've been nailing this team with accurate reports, for a long time. So there's not really any surprises of what's going on, who's moving and shaking on the depth chart, or all that. As far as there not being a spring game, I'm 99% sure there won't be one. I think there's these guys. I mean, who knows what they just re-upped Colin Simmons for? Do you really want to see that guy running around on the field after 15 practices in April? breaks an ankle, somebody just lands awkwardly on them, and you've got all that money tied up in them. That's one aspect of it. And then you've got guys that we wrote about, a number of guys that haven't been talked about enough, but they're going to be the stars of the future, Wardell Mack, Zena Umeozulu. Do you want those guys being put on display right before the spring portal window opens up? Hey, Zena's going to have to wait his turn probably. He's got, Ethan Burke, Colton Vosick is in front of him, Trey Moore's in front of him. But do you want, some school to say, hey, we, come here, we need a starter right now? No, you don't want that. So I understand it. It's unfortunate for the fans. We had a lot of fun. We were talking about doing a radio show from it, or a video show from it, whatever they call these things, YouTube, doing a tailgate. It was going to be fun. We might still do something like that, fly Luke down like we did last year. It is fun to gather. It's a kind of a midway point through the off season, and get to meet with fellow fans. But I understand it from their perspective for sure.
And this is not to say that there won't be something. There very well could be a fan event over the spring.
It's Texas. They're going to want some sort of marketing opportunity.
Yeah.
They'll figure out something. I'm sure there will be something. They need to do something for the fans, but I don't expect a game.
No, I don't think there'll be a game. It's hard for me to reconcile CDC's marketing acumen, especially when it comes to the fans and fan service and experience, and not do something during this window that has generally been pretty successful for them. They don't make a lot of money. I don't think they make any money on that, right? It's free for everybody, but it does provide a lot for the community and the fans. As Joe was saying, the university also generally does a very good job of scheduling other sporting events around that same time. So you may have a softball game, baseball game. So the community really does come together during that period of time. And speaking of community, please join us at InsideTexas.com. It is $1 American for a week. I promise you are going to get certainly the information that you received here, but much more in depth. Eric's audits of the rooms have been excellent. We've got Paul, we've got Ian, we've got Joe. The team there is really putting some really good work in, especially in this off season. We can tell that we've got, 500 people here watching this, and you guys are diehard Texas fans. We really appreciate that. You are not the idle fans that just check in on the game and don't do anything else. So if you are one of those 500 and you haven't joined us over at InsideTexas.com, please do. Just give us a chance to earn your business. It is $1 American for 7 days. And I'm very confident that after that 7 days, you'll want to stick around and be a part of our community. On behalf of Eric and I, we thank you for joining us on this Saturday. Have a great long weekend, and we'll see you guys on Monday.